So hi everyone, welcome to our session, Reimagining Pre-K-12 OER Development through Teacher Education Programs. We're happy that you all joined us this morning. Stacy and I were just talking about how we kind of have a bit of conference fatigue. We might have gone a little too hard the first couple days. So thank you for joining us today. I am Jennifer Van Allen. I am an assistant professor of literacy education, and this is my colleague, Stacy Katz.
I'm Stacy. I'm an assistant professor in the library at Lehman College, and I'm the Open Resources Librarian and STEM Liaison.
So we're from Lehman College, City University of New York. So right there in the city. There we go. So today we're going to talk about a study that we've done. We're using a design research approach. So this was the first iteration for this study. And our purpose was to understand teacher candidates' perceptions of sharing their work openly and the effects of a renewable assignment on their beliefs and practices. You might be wondering, what is a renewable assignment? Well, basically, it's an assignment that has value beyond the course. So in a disposable assignment, you give students an assignment, they do it, it goes into the learning management system, or they turn it into you on paper, less so on paper these days. And then that's it. It doesn't go anywhere. So with a renewable assignment, students are invited to openly license their work and share it with others publicly, so that it has value beyond just the classroom. So we redesigned a class, which we will talk about, one of my classes, and I worked with Stacy to do that. So we were wondering, as we integrated this assignment into the course, how the teacher candidates engaged with the renewable assignment and the effects that the renewable assignment had on the teacher candidates.
So just as a bit of background, a lot of the impetus to this work came from being part of the CUNY OER initiative. OER started at Lehman in 2016, where a few faculty started redesigning courses. And then really it kicked into high gear when we got money from New York State through CUNY to redesign courses with OER. Jennifer was part of the third cohort of faculty redesigning their courses. And as she and I started talking more about OER, it led to a discussion on open pedagogy, and Jennifer was really interested in how that might work with her students who are also practicing in-service teachers. Really involving them in creating and adapting and remixing OER was of interest to her, especially because teaching teachers about OER has such returns on investment. Because they get involved in learning about Creative Commons licenses, about copyright, and really empowering them to become creators of knowledge, that they really feel like they have some control over their curriculum, over their materials for their courses.
Yeah, so looking at the research, the background research, the Bay Analytics Group, I always get the name wrong, but they do, say it again?
Bayview Analytics, formerly Babson Survey Research Group.
Yeah, they do a study about every 2 years, and looking at awareness of OER in higher ed and in K-12 education. And the most recent study that came out in 2020 showed that only 31% of K-12 educators have an awareness of OER, which I also found in the course. When you go and you look for resources in pre-K-12 education, there are some, they're there, but they're limited in availability. There are less resources for PK-12 than there are for higher ed. We were also looking at teacher self-efficacy to say, these teachers, what inspires them or what motivates them to use different instructional practices and different resources. And we found through the research that teacher self-efficacy was a big piece of that, that their perceptions of their own capabilities affects the efforts that they expend on something. And teacher self-efficacy is influenced by student achievement, feedback from their colleagues, discussions with colleagues, so administration perceptions of their performance, what feedback parents are giving them. And so we wanted to say, all right, how are we going to build this into our work as well? And we saw that OER awareness and development in teacher education programs is one pathway that we could use to possibly building a bigger breadth of K-12 OER resources and bringing awareness to K-12 educators. So it all started with the course redesign. And when I first got into this project, I had no idea it would grow into this. I just was initially going to redesign my course using OER in order to reduce and eliminate the cost for students for the course materials. And then, as Stacy said, I learned about open pedagogy. I'm like, well, I'm already doing part of that in my work. I want the work to be meaningful, and I want them to see value beyond just what they're learning in this course. And so it became a matter of not just using OER in my course, but trying to raise awareness about OER among my students that were in it by engaging them with the materials so they could feel what it feels like to work with OER, and then showing them that there are these resources for PK-12 education as well. Once we learned about the renewable assignments and I discovered the potential there, I took one of the assignments that was already, it wasn't completely disposable. It was a learning unit I was asking my students to create and implement in their classrooms. So it already had value beyond the class, but beyond that, they didn't do anything else with it. They reflected on how it went, what they could improve on with the lesson, what the strengths were, and that was it. So I decided to take that a step further and then invite them to rework the lesson and share it openly. And so you'll see the renewable assignment design on the right-hand side of the screen. This is a language, literacies, and educational technology class, which I strategically chose because of the interrelationship between digital literacies and OER. So as part of the renewable assignment, the goal was then to add to the breadth of PK-12 OER materials available and also empower my students to become creators of PK-12 OER, to share what their knowledge with others, and to share their resources with others. So if you want to know more about the project, the renewable assignment, and how we redesigned the course, there's an open praxis article which is linked, and Stacy already put it in the chat, which goes into much more depth about the assignment. So basically the assignment, all students had to upload their work into a shared Google Drive folder, which we are going to continue to add to. So this is going to be this course. Each time a student takes the course, they will have access to the folder so they can continue to build on each other's resources, whether they want to share it more publicly or not. And then they're invited to share it to OER Commons at the end of the course.
Okay. So yeah, we decided that we should really run, a research study to see what was happening in the course. And so we used a convergent mixed methods research design. So we collected data concurrently, but analyzed them independently. The students were, students at Lehman College in this course. So there were 9 graduate level teacher candidates who were our participants in the study. And you can see in the data sources that we have artifacts from all 9 students. Only 7 participated in the study, and then 4 were invited to participate in interviews who had completed in the study. 2 of those students were ones who had shared their work openly, and 2 of those were those who did not share their work openly. So we wanted to get a mix in perspective of like, why would they have shared their work and why wouldn't they have shared their work? So for the survey analysis, we used a univariate descriptive statistics. And then we used inductive thematic analysis for the qualitative interviews and peer debriefing to see if our results matched, so that, well, Jennifer did the analysis and checked with me to make sure that she was analyzing it and that I agreed. So that was sort of our methods going forward in the research design. And then we can look at some of the results. So you can see that the results, the pie chart, if you're able to see that, So students had the option to either create or remix or adapt their for their assignment. And 2/3 of them chose to create a new resource rather than remix or adapt an assignment. That we think is partly because students are more used to creating than they are to remixing or adapting as an option. Most of them did share only with the class, but there were several who did choose a Creative Commons license for their work. Then there were survey questions about how valuable they found this assignment. This was an assignment that Jennifer had been running several years. So it was a good assignment in terms of like how they found it to learning as a student. What's interesting is when you get down to the one where participating and learning about OER helped me develop in the future, that's where they were a little more neutral to negative. So they didn't fully get that the value of OER in terms of their production of it, how that had value. They were much more interested in the value of OER as consumers of OER rather than the producers of OER themselves.
Yeah, and I think partly that has to do, I should have mentioned in the course redesign, Stacy came in and co-taught a class on copyright and Creative Commons licensing, and we examined resources. So part of that, it was built into the course as well as the usage of the OER as well. So those were our quantitative findings. Our qualitative findings, we used the interviews and the open-ended survey questions to really dig in a little bit deeper. And we had 3 themes that developed. The first was that we found that the teacher candidates' understanding of OER definitely improved, although their levels of understanding varied. So they all were able to easily identify what OER were and how to determine if a source has a Creative Commons license or not. And you can see some of the quotes there that represent that. They were all very, very enthusiastic. We introduced the OER as OER Commons is the source that we took them to most often. And we introduced it as a free teachers pay teachers. And that had their attention hooked because they're like, oh, I spent a lot of money on there. I'm like, well, you don't need to. Look at all these resources that are available. And so that kind of built their general understanding of OER. And the licensing, some kind of took off with it and they're like, oh yeah, I see the differences between these, but there were many who were still kind of, they understood, they were able to identify those CC licenses, but then understanding the differences and the nuances between it was a little intimidating for some of them. In fact, some of them shared that the reason that they didn't openly license their work is because they weren't sure which license to put on it. So those were the big understandings of OER that we saw in the teacher candidates.
Yeah, in terms of value of OER, that was another theme that came out. They really felt positive about OER. They thought that OER was something that fit with their ethos as a teacher, that it's about collaboration, about sharing. Other teachers can take the projects and really adapt it to their students. So they understood that value of adaptation, but somehow the final execution of sharing out didn't quite happen. And some of that may have been assignment timing. Jennifer and I have talked about this a little bit about, they were at the very end of their semester. It was winter. They were kind of done and ready to move on. But they did find it that and there was a piece of that too, of they hadn't actually tried this assignment out yet with their students. And that came out a little bit, that Jennifer will talk about the sharing of it. But they really felt like OER was something that they would use in their teaching themselves, and that they might think about sharing it. And that gets into a little bit more of their self-efficacy and sharing, which is the next theme.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they really like the idea that they could adapt these resources to their own needs and their own students. And they were empowered by that piece of it. But then when it came to actually sharing it themselves, they didn't want to do that, which is really against, I've gone to a lot of sessions in open ed that have had student voices as part of it. And overwhelmingly, the students are willing to share. And we did not find that in this piece. And we think that it was because of their self-efficacy. Although they definitely saw value in sharing, sharing. Many elected not to share because they were uncomfortable for some reason. They weren't confident. And that ranged from they weren't sure about the copyright, they weren't sure which license to put on it. Others said, I don't know if it was good enough. So the way the course ran, it ended at Thanksgiving, but their final assignment wasn't due until a couple of weeks later. So they designed their lesson or project, whatever it happened to be. We had different projects created. One was an OER book chapter for first graders, and then there were many like problem-based or project-based learning units that were created. And so they were implementing them after our final class. They implemented, and then they had to make a decision about licensing. And so I was trying to get them to do that in that last class, but they were not quite ready at that point. And then there wasn't another class where we were meeting together after that. So I think that partly had something to do with it, that they hadn't implemented yet. They weren't sure what the student results were going to be when they were encouraged to make that choice, even though they could change their choices later on. Others were like, well, I'm a new teacher. Nobody wants to learn from me yet. I'm learning right now. So I'm not comfortable sharing because I don't know what I'm doing yet. It was kind of that sort of sense. So what I found is that in the follow-up interviews, that after they implemented the project, they were overwhelmingly encouraged by their results. And so after seeing that the students excelled, that they loved it, that the work was really powerful for their students, then they wanted to share it, but they thought it was too late because they weren't getting guidance on how to do that. They got feedback. There were some that got feedback from parents. One parent that wasn't even in the class that experienced the project wrote a letter back to the school district and said, I heard about this project that happened in this class and I want to see more of that. I want to see more of that in the school district. They were really empowered by their results and the feedback that they got from administrators and colleagues.
Which one student is going to be presenting also?
Yeah, we actually have a student who went beyond the class. I didn't even know that she was going to do this, but she put in for a poster presentation at a state conference about the students' work from the project that she did. So it really was empowering to them after the fact, but by then it was too late for them to openly license it, which was interesting. And so those were our major findings from it. So now we have a few questions because this was just our first iteration. So we would like to get your feedback. We want to know what you're thinking about the work that we've done and how we can improve on it. So here's some questions. So feel free to put your answers in the chat, or if you would like to unmute yourselves, we'd love to know what you're thinking about how we can improve on this model. How can we encourage more sharing among the teacher candidates, and what these findings might mean for reimagining open education and teacher preparation and in pre-K-12 education?
Right, because part of it is we feel like if we can get this going in teacher education, once they're actually practicing teachers, or these are already, but when this can be formative in their practice so that they continue it as teachers. Mm-hmm. So if you want, put in the chat, unmute, we'd like to have some discussion too.
Absolutely.
I was trying to put this in the chat box, but then it was taking too long to type. So I'll just ask. This is a really basic question, but I'm wondering about your opinions on when is it okay to not do a renewable assignment? So in one of the classes that I teach, students do a literary analysis where they compare two texts, and it's the same two texts. And honestly, I'm not sure that having like 50 versions of student essays on those same two texts would be really beneficial to the world. But I think the exercise that students do that then prepares them for future renewable assignments is really valuable. But lately I've been kind of wondering like, maybe am I selling myself or my students short by having this initial non-renewable assignment? So any thoughts?
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, in this class, being that it's an ed tech class and we're looking at digital literacies, students do a lot of prep work for this. I send them out to a different app to check out or a different tool that they might use in their classroom. Um, every week, they have to go out and they have to create something that they can use in their classroom in the future from these ed tech tools. And I don't have them share their work in that because it's really kind of messy. It's the thinking work that they need to do in order to design a project later on. So I think that if you're thinking about how this is building knowledge for them to then create something that is meaningful and authentic for others, I think that that's the key.
Thank you.
So we have a couple of, we have a lot in the chat. Emily said the need to iterate an assignment before feeling ready to share openly resonates with me. You're absolutely right about the power of training future teachers about OER. One of the more enthusiastic teacher candidates in this study, she was like, "We should tell everybody. Nobody knows about this." And she went on and on in the interview about how we need to tell people more. And so I think that it is powerful in and of itself that they became aware that there are these materials out there that they can use and adapt and create when they're ready.
I would also say Jennifer's class is one of the last ones that they're taking in the program. But she has 3 colleagues who this semester are going to start teaching with OER. So hopefully this won't be the first time students heard of OER next time we run this.
Right. Yeah, it's true. Yeah, this was one of the first courses. It's one of the only courses in our School of Ed that uses OER, but not so much anymore, thanks to Stacy.
And you, let's not, sell you short. I think other faculty are seeing what you're doing, and hearing about it. Jennifer and I, part of publishing on it, it's nice to publish on it for the field, but actually publishing on it has been a huge way that it's grown throughout her department. The library and School of Education have a research and writers group where we share what we write before we submit. So Jennifer's colleagues see what she's writing beforehand about OER. And that's been one of the ways that it's gained interest and traction within the department. So it's kind of a little marketing tool within the department too.
It's very true. Yeah. Catherine sharing might increase with a small group project and have the project submitted to an ed journal, which is a great idea. Another Catherine said end of semester fatigue is a big factor. Both teachers and students are just trying to stay afloat, and it's very true. Yeah. So I'm not sure this is good enough to be sharing, can be daunting. And I agree with that. We're thinking in the next reiteration that we need to have the candidates come together after they implement. So trying to find a way to move this project earlier and then share their lesson plans and give each other feedback on it would be beneficial. Sarah noted maybe beginning with a lower stakes sharing remixing activity, probably in a group, to have the students have the opportunity to share openly along the way. Yeah, we tried that. That was what the last class was all about, was about them giving each other feedback on the lesson before implementation. They just didn't have them ready at that point to get ready for sharing more publicly. So I'm trying to work that in without compromising the goals of the project itself. So yeah, definitely something we're thinking about. Creating OER that provides something missing, which is required by NGSS. Computational thinking in lessons. Yeah, absolutely. That's a great idea, Catherine. Celia said, wouldn't also be very useful for teacher candidates to have contact with OER before practice. In Portugal, the practice is only in the end of the course. Can you explain that a little bit more? Are you saying like their own use of OER?
I mean, I think maybe it would be that these are in-service teachers already, but that just happens to be who's in Jennifer's program.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, I'm going to interrupt just briefly to stop the recording, and then this conversation can carry on for the next 15 minutes with the speakers.
Thank you.
Amanda.